And this is the truth about Russia's.
See, we know what kind of territory we're getting into there. The truth bombs are about to be falling on us.
What Sarah Huckabee just announced proves the truth about Russia.
Isn't it ironic that pro-Russian activists always claim to speak the truth when talking about something controversial?
Как так, сука, на стриме нахуй посмотрел, блядь? На стриме нахуй посмотрел, блядь, сука! На стриме нахуй слышал, блядь!
The biggest hotspots regarding Russia and the West are Ukraine, Syria, and the 2006 election meddling. Whenever online media outlets began reporting on the situations that went on, they soon found comments and messages flooded with hostile pro-Putin comments. There are patterns and similar structures noticed by analysts on all sites in broken English, as if they were following a brief. They have gone by many names, such as Krembots, trolls from Olgino, or in Russian, the Internet Research Agency. As explained, they are allegedly based in St. Petersburg, working 12-hour shifts for $790. Several Western and international groups have managed to tap into the so-called troll factory to start exposing them. In March 2014, the Polish version of Newsweek expressed suspicion that Russia was employing people to bombard media outlets with pro-Russian comments on Ukraine-related issues. Poland's governmental computer emergency response team launched an investigation, and it did confirm that assigned teams were tasked with flooding the internet portals with their pro-Kremlin comments. A similar discovery was made in Germany, and in May 2014, the hacker group Anonymous International began publishing documents received from hacked emails of these troll factories. From the reports, each troll was to have at least 6 different Facebook accounts, 10 different Twitter accounts, and post 50 to 100 times a day on social media. They also maintained these false identities with a mixture of posts on ordinary things like cooking or sports, so that political comments look more genuine. Some of them even pose as ex-soldiers from the US Armed Forces who criticize the American government. Even investigators within the Russian government have discovered their tracks and claim that their impact mainly focuses on confusion, making the internet distasteful so that no one watches it, and try to effectively shut down debate. Some of their lives have been exposed, such as the Colombian chemicals plant explosion hoax in September 2014. Many trolls have also allegedly taken part in funding propaganda that would push for further division in the West. The meddling in the 2016 presidential election is a very strong example, but so is Brexit, as The Guardian and Wired have held investigations on these trolls spreading misinformation on the European Union. Even the Daily Mail, a pro-Brexit media outlet, supported these claims of Russian intervention. A less-known instance is the 2017 French elections, as far-right candidate Marine Le Pen brought up ideas such as Frexit and a withdrawal from NATO, as well as closer relations with Russia. On the day before the election, when campaigning was supposed to stop, Macron's campaign was hit with a massive computer hack which portrayed 9 gigabytes of campaign emails online. Many pointed this towards Russian trolls. The authenticity of these acts also have one common denominator: individuals who have left the country and reported on their work.
In late 2014, when he answered an ad at the Internet Research Agency, I figured out early that the main goal was to create a picture of the world and the Internet that mirrored what was being shown on Russian television. Bespalov was put on the Ukraine desk. Russia's covert support for rebels in eastern Ukraine was underway, so anything that made Ukrainian government soldiers look bad was a priority, especially stories about dead children. We saw a news story that some militiamen were hiding in the school in Donbass, and it was being shelled. Some children died. The facts were unclear, says Bespalov, but that didn't matter. We simply took the news stories and wrote that Ukrainian soldiers shot and killed the children. That's it. No hesitation.
When it comes to the war in Ukraine, the trolls echo the Russian media in portraying it as a civil war instead of a war between two neighboring states. They constantly talk about the Euromaidan revolution in 2014 as a coup d'etat organized by Western governments, and they call the annexation of Crimea a rightful act where Russian citizens must be protected. Going back to the war in Donbass, it is only a conflict where Russian citizens, quote, react to Ukrainian forces occupying the area.
И малые населенные пункты, и крупные города окружены украинской армией, которая прямой наводкой наносит удары по жилым кварталам. Как ни печально, напоминает события даже Второй мировой войны, когда немецко-фашистские оккупанты, войска немецко-фашистские окружали наши города, допустим, Ленинград.
Topic that they also cover is the downing of Malaysia Airlines MH17 in war-torn Donbass, where they blame the Ukrainians, and the most prominent argument is that a Ukrainian fighter jet took it down. It is possible to combat these claims, and here are some counter-arguments along with links that you can use as backup. In regards to the Euromaidan revolution, the people of Ukraine want to join the European Union. Polls in 2005 did show that 2/3 of the people were in favor of joining it, and the then President Viktor Yanukovychs cancelled that bid and chose to follow closer ties with Russia. It is not up to the government to decide if they will enter the European Union. It is up to the people. They're supposed to vote in a referendum if the country will go in that direction. That is why they protested. It is quite easy to argue that there is no proof that foreign agents were in the country inciting riots to lead an assault and then seize power. For starters, police units, which the Russian government actually influenced, were ordered to fire on the protesters with sniper rifles and automatic firearms, while the protesters only responded with makeshift weapons, some of them which weren't even lethal. There's absolutely no way that they could have taken over the government that way. Furthermore, what pro-Russian activists fail to mention is that Yanukovych and his political allies fled on their own. In fact, they had been planning it for a while. The agreement with Russia was supposed to be signed on the evening of February 21st, and yet security camera footage shows Yanukovych removing valuables from his mansion in Meziria that very morning. As we all know, Yanukovych disappeared the next morning, fleeing to eastern Ukraine, then to Crimea, then Russia, where he still resides. It's quite easy to see that his escape was planned. Now regarding the war in Donbass, there is mounting evidence of Russia's troops being involved. First of all, in late 2015, when the world turned its focus to Russia's deployment in Syria, Putin himself admitted that Russian troops were in Ukraine.
Когда мы вынуждены, я хочу подчеркнуть, вынуждены были защищать и русскоязычное население в Донбассе, вынуждены были отреагировать на стремление людей, живущих в Крыму, вернуться в состав Российской Федерации.
You also have multiple satellite images that NATO took showing Russian artillery and armor crossing the border and engaging Ukrainian forces. The Russian government even affirmed the affiliation of 10 Russian paratroopers who were captured in Ukrainian territory, 20 miles from the Russian border. It is also worth noting that the identification markings were removed. Another piece of evidence revolves around the chief Military Prosecutor's Office of Russia, which confirmed the death of Puskov troops in 2014, which was declared a state secret. It is also interesting to note that there were reports of Puskov troops involved in Ukraine. A popular Russian newspaper called Komsomolskaya Pravda showed separatists showing weapons, vehicles, and equipment that is unique to the Russian military. Boris Nemtsov, a Putin critic, was assassinated after attempting to reveal evidence of Russian involvement. Amnesty International and OSCE witnessed troops with legitimate Russian markings fighting the Ukrainian troops. Russia claimed that MH17 was shot down by a Ukrainian fighter jet. However, a Dutch investigation did conclude that it was destroyed by blast fragmentation from a Buk missile, which the rebels do not have and could have only been supplied by Russia. What's more suspicious is that after MH17 was down, the separatists refused to allow investigators on the site for a while, and they claimed on their Twitter page that they shot down a Ukrainian jet but deleted the post. Also, it is proven that the satellite image where MH17 was shot down by a jet is a hoax because the Malaysian logo was on the wrong side of the plane.
To follow the voice connection. At the moment, we are on the final stages of our boarding and
People from their own homes were able to recognize Russian troops in Ukraine, as many of them have taken photos of themselves fighting in these regions while geotagging their locations on social media. Simon Ostrovsky, a Russian-American journalist, did a very thorough investigation where he exposed a few Russian troops who were fighting in Ukraine. I left a link to the documentary in the description below. Now, one thing you can argue is that the amount of weaponry that the separatists have is unbelievably large, and eastern Ukraine does not have that kind of industrial power, especially when it comes to artillery or multiple rocket launchers. The last part I want to touch on is when Russians say that they have the right to protect Russian citizens in Ukraine, as well as Georgia and in the Baltics. Listen to what Putin said on immigration.
Должны действовать очень аккуратно для того, чтобы обеспечить интересы коренных жителей Российской Федерации. Прежде всего, мы все-таки российское государство, и у нас 85% считают себя русскими, и другие народы нам...
Well, here's the thing. If you want to go by that logic, Ukraine is for Ukrainians. The Russians who live in Crimea and eastern Ukraine live in, just as the name is, Ukraine. If they want to live there, they will follow Ukrainian law. If they don't like it, they can go back to Russia. They cannot start revolting and overthrowing buildings that don't belong to them. The same goes for Russians who live in Georgia and the Baltics.
If you come from Latgale, or if you are Russian, you are a nobody. You are a second-class citizen. But I don't have a right to vote. I even don't have a passport. We have to change that.
Well, no shit, you can't vote or have a passport. You are not a Latvian citizen. You are Russian. Considering that I gave my thorough analysis on Ukraine, let's see how Russian trolls talk about it in person. There are many pro-Putin channels on YouTube, but one has gotten my attention, which is a pretty big channel called South Front. I've watched this channel for a while, and I have to say, we really are in the middle of a media war here. If you look at the videos themselves, the very titles show glorification of Russian and Syrian forces. Let's read what the channel description is about. They claim to be an analysis and intelligence team with experts from the four corners of the earth. Who are these experts exactly? You don't seem to have those references anywhere. How do we know you're not making all this stuff up? Your videos are made with archived footage from the news and graphs that can be computer made from apps. You clearly don't have any field investigations. This is quite strange, since later on in your description you claim to provide analysis on military operations as well as important data, and yes, you claim to uncover the truth. As usual, Putin and Xi Jinping just love the truth. But let me test that. How do you uncover the truth exactly? Let's take a look at your main website and see if that will give more information. So let's take a look now. As much as I can see, your website is basically the same thing as your YouTube channel. You don't offer any information on your so-called experts. No analytical investigations. I mean, hey, can you show me which of these reporters give information? Oh, wait, contact. Hold on, what's this? Submit your story? Wait, really? So, basically, anyone can come onto this site and submit their own story. I can write that cats are sleeping with cows on a daily basis, and you do a video on it. Now, wow, that is some credible source. Yeah, that's really, really good. Some true truth tellers here. And so what's this? Become a volunteer? You have something to saying that people can volunteer, although it doesn't necessarily say what you're going to volunteer for. You pretty much mentioned that you have Patreon basically everywhere. You want people to donate to you. Yeah, you mentioned that quite a lot. It's literally everywhere. Donate dollars and euros. Yeah, it's just beautiful. Does it say anything else? Oh yeah, as usual, if you're able to and like our content, please support the project. Yeah, but what bugs me the most is I do not see anything else anywhere talking about your so-called experts or choices or field of investigations. You basically have nothing with your own footage anywhere. Like military analysis. Those are just articles that are based off your videos. I mean, say what you want about Vice News, the people who expose the Russian troops in Ukraine, but they do have listed reporters and correspondents as well as their own and investigations. South Front has nothing. They just expect us to take their word. But okay, let's go another direction. Maybe we'd be able to find South Front a reliable news channel if they maybe had a credible source of information. I find it very unlikely that the military will give their intelligence to a YouTube channel, but let's see what other organizations collab with them in regards to the sources they are receiving. They make a lot of Syria War Report and Russia Defense Report videos, but nowhere do they show any source of information they gather. It's also worth mentioning that the info partners are anti-Western networks, so we do not have any way of knowing if they are telling the truth. They have nothing on their videos, nothing on their Facebook page, nothing. It's all even questionable when every single one of their videos are all anti-Western, so it's quite easy to see where they align. Oh look, examples of related channels are RT, Russia Insight, and Press TV. Lovely. Two of them are state-run media outlets by Russia and Iran, while the third is a YouTube channel that is heavily pro-Russian. So yeah, South Front clearly has no bias. Considering that this video's topic was Ukraine, let's view two of their short videos on Ukraine. In case anyone doesn't know, the war in Ukraine is currently at a stalemate and has been reduced to skirmishes as both sides accuse each other of violating the Minsk ceasefire. In this video, South Front tries to say that the government in Kiev wants to restart the war. Let's check it out.
On February 1st and 2nd, heavy clashes continued between the Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF, backed up by pro-Kiev paramilitary groups, and forces of the Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, in the Avdiivka industrial area near the DPR capital of Donetsk.
And they still fail to mention that Russia is there too.
At the same time, massive artillery strikes were reported along nearly all of the DPR contact line. Pro-Kiev forces deployed more heavy military equipment and made two fresh offensive attempts against DPR forces' positions at the Avdiivka industrial area, but were pushed to retreat, suffering casualties. Both sides are claiming heavy death tolls. The Poroshenko regime urgently needs to attract the attention of foreign players to obtain their assistance amid the ongoing political and economic crisis in Ukraine.
Well, the leaders of France and Germany did indeed negotiate the Minsk agreement, which brought an end to the hostilities in large scale. Also, why are you talking about Russian and DPR forces using tanks and heavy artillery since they have also been advancing on the line? How do we know they didn't start the attack?
Another goal is to disrupt possible U.S.-Russian rapprochement, escalating the situation in Europe. Mainstream media assists the regime, pushing an idea of humanitarian crisis in Kiev-controlled areas and blaming DPR forces for violations of the Minsk agreement. Once again, the Kiev regime violates humanitarian and moral norms to achieve its own political goals.
Wow, that's a mouthful of hypocrisy. Your channel is exactly the same thing you're trying to report. You're portraying anyone opposing Russia as an enemy that commits crimes against humanity while always trying to victimize pro-Russian forces. Oh, and as always, you don't have any sources supporting your claims. Now let's head over to the most recent video on the war in Ukraine. Ah, yes, who would call it anything other than the truth? Okay, who is this person? Finally a name. Well, there's nothing much on him, but I can see he's somehow connected to the recent shelling in Ukraine, although not a lot is said about who he is or where he saw certain parts of the war.
Media coverage of the recent escalation in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine has once again shown that mainstream media provides a slanted view on the military situation in the region.
Oh, look who's talking. Also, I have to say that is the fakest American accent I've ever heard. You're trying way too hard.
It is especially interesting to observe how various mainstream outlets and so-called NGOs blamed militia of the Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, for an alleged usage of human shields in artillery duels. However, all these reports just hide how things really work on the ground. The recent escalation began in late January, starting with a large-scale offensive by Ukrainian armed forces in the industrial area of Avdiivka, south of the DPR capital of Donetsk. Meanwhile, artillery strikes dramatically intensified along the entire contact line. The escalation deeply affected Donetsk, Makivka, and Yanukovychs, which compose a de facto, united, highly populated urban complex with industrial infrastructure. A Soviet-made 82mm mortar, widely used by both sides in the conflict, has a maximum firing range of 3 kilometers. A 120mm mortar has a firing range of 5 kilometers. D-30 122mm howitzers and 2 S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzers have a firing range of about 15 kilometers. 2 S-3 Akatsiya self-propelled howitzers have a firing range of about 18 kilometers, and BM-21 Grad military rocket launcher systems have a firing range of between 30 and 40 kilometers in case of the usage of modern rockets. If DPR and Ukrainian artillery units want to hit each other, they are pushed to deploy these weapons much closer to the contact line. In case of a real combat in the area of Donetsk, and especially in a case of counter-battery fire, DPR forces are pushed to operate from areas located close to the urban complex. Furthermore, artillery units have to maneuver on a constant basis in order to avoid artillery strikes by the enemy.
Okay, what does this have to do with the civilian population being used as human shields? All you just talked about was how artillery duels take place. If the DPR forces really looked after the safety of the population, why didn't they evacuate the area? Why do they have to continue engaging in an area where civilians live? You did not cover these questions at all.
In turn, Ukrainian armed forces have many more options to deploy artillery and other combat systems in non-populated areas, but they do not do this, because in this case, they will not be able to blame DPR units for shelling some residential areas. It's obvious that both sides implement a kind of military censorship, hiding on an official level. However, this allows the mainstream media and think tanks to highlight some facts while hiding others, in order to create a wide range of media forgeries, manipulating public opinion over the conflict.
Your own map even shows that the DPR and Russian forces position themselves in populated areas. So how exactly can Ukrainian forces fight them in non-populated areas? The only reason why they'd be in populated areas during combat is to use civilian populations as human shields. Is your audience really this stupid? Oh, and cut the attempt at trying to act unbiased. That ship has sailed. So in conclusion, I can say that Southfront is a Russian proxy site that does not give any credible information. They have no reporters and do not conduct any documented investigations in conflict zones, hence the need for news cam footage to explain their point. You can easily detect their bias from watching too much RT, and they do not show any sources to back up their claims. One thing you can conclude is that they're more interested in making money than reporting the news, since they leave their Patreon page everywhere while also constantly asking for their videos to be supported. I will admit that they're really good at editing and they look almost professional, but in reality they're just a YouTube channel that promotes Putin agenda. I also left a link to some online criticism of South Front if you want to see for yourself in the description below.